Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Glow at the Museum of English Rural Life. My name is Anna Jones, and I'm going to be your host this evening. There's no better person not to spend the evening with than my colleague, Dr. Ollie Douglas, who is the curator of the MERL collections.
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
And Ollie and I will be taking you through Glow, an exploration of light and dark. We come to you this evening as part of the Being Human Festival. This year, we are having to take our ever popular MERL Lates online. We're in a global pandemic and a national lockdown, but we're really hoping this evening to bring a glow to your lockdown life. This evening is going to be an evening of exploration of linked themes of light and darkness, also thinking about harvest and festivals, community and celebration. And the programme this evening is so exciting. We're really pleased to be bringing you a whole range of diverse and interesting films and clips, dance, creativity and discourse. And it's a really fantastic opportunity for you to be part of the Diwali cultural heritage that is brought to us this evening through Kala the Arts, and also combined with some live talks and some pre-recorded talks from our colleagues at the University of Reading. We've got about 10 films to share with you this evening, and Ollie and I will chat to you and each other in between. And we're showcasing research and arts, culture and creativity. We've got some things that are moving, some things that are celebratory, but we hope that everything that we bring you this evening will be illuminating and enlightening. As I say, we're brought to you this evening as part of the Being Human Festival, which is a national festival of the humanities. It's taking place in the UK. It started on the 12th and goes through to the 22nd of November. We've got some information going up on the chat bar, so you'll have some links and connections there, including the Being Human Festival and the rest of the programme that you can take part in after this evening. Please stay with us. Well, we don't expect you to stay slavishly with us until 10 o'clock. You can dip in and dip out. We've got cocktails here. Cheers, courtesy of Milk, who normally would bring us cocktails to our live lates, but we're online with you this evening and coming to you at home. In terms of the Being Human Festival, they're supported by the School of Advanced Study, University of London in partnership with Arts and Humanities Research Council and the British Academy. It would be wonderful if you can support them and us by filling in the survey at some point this evening. That's going into the chat bar as well. It's really important that we can keep these activities free. Obviously, we're coming to you online free today, but when we're hopefully next year back all together again, we want to be able to, and so to Being Human, keep those free for you. So please do fill in the survey. It's really important for them and us to be able to get the information, feedback and data gathering in order to keep the festival going into future years. So we've got lots of people that, as I say, are coming on pre-recorded and live with us this evening. But first of all, just love to hand over to Ollie to give you a little bit of context about where we are this evening. We're both apart, but we're under one roof here at the Museum of English Rural Life. Ollie.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for a brilliant introduction. As Anna mentioned, the festival this evening is part of Being Human, and Being Human's theme for this year's festival is New Worlds. Our interpretation of that is slightly different to many other institutions. We've taken the decision to focus on ideas of lightness and darkness, so coming out of the darkness into the light, and what you might experience in that kind of new world and vice versa. So exploring these different spaces conceptually and quite literally. So we're in the museum. You can see in behind Anna, there are some glowing lights. There's a bit of the collection out on a table around me, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to take you out round the galleries. So normally, for those of you who might not be familiar with what a MERL Late is, we like to give things slightly obscure names, MERL being one of them, the Museum of English Rural Life, abbreviated to the rather odd acronym MERL. We also some years ago had an event called a spectacular, and no one really knew what a spectacular was either. So don't be worried if you don't know what a late is. It just means that we'll be up late and we'll be wandering around the galleries and looking at things in the museum and talking about things in the museum and talking with loads of exciting colleagues from across the University of Reading and beyond. What would normally happen in these circumstances is you'd be here with us and you'd be wandering around the galleries, and some of those talks would take place in the galleries, sometimes we'd try and hook lots of exciting external themes and wider subjects onto the collections, and our academic colleagues are always excited to do that with us. Obviously, that can't happen in this situation, otherwise I wouldn't be able to wander freely through the galleries and show you things, freely through the stores, because there'd be too many people in there. So instead, we've got them pre-recorded, and some of them will be dropping in, as Anna said. In order to give you just a little bit of context, though, I think it's important to talk about what we think about new worlds. Now, obviously, the idea of new worlds conjures up sort of conversations about discovery and concepts perhaps of exploring other parts of the world. And this is something we've been beginning to think about a lot in relation to the MERL's collection. We're beginning to explore some of the colonial connections to the collections here, much like many of our colleagues across the wider heritage sector and the wider humanities world of academia. And just to give you one example of that might be quite surprising to you, you will know about organic agriculture, and you will know that this is a movement that sort of seems to have its origins in many innovative actions in UK and North American culture in the mid-20th century. But what few of us know, in fact, I was only brought to this when I came to work at the MERL, is that actually organic agriculture and the movement has its roots in Indian Vedic agriculture. So Albert Howard, one of the pioneers of Western European organic agriculture, got all of his ideas from Indian traditional agricultural practices. So there are lots of links that link our collections and pioneers like Yves Balfour, who was a great voice for the Soil Association and the early organic movement, and who studied here at the University of Reading. There are great links that link us to the wider world. And another good example of that, I was sitting in the room that Anna's in at the weekend, when it was in fact Diwali, and we had a conference that we were part of with members from the International Association of Agricultural Museums. We host their congress, their 19th congress here at the Museum of English Rural Life next year. But as part of that, we had a presentation on traditional Indian agriculture, and the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage were involved. Surajit Sarkar from Ambedkar University, and they spoke incredibly powerfully about some of the ways in which grassroots Indian agriculture is having an enormous impact on the future of those agricultural worlds. And we're intimately connected to those worlds here in Reading, because Reading was the home to Sutton's Seeds, and Sutton's Seeds had its own headquarters in Reading, but it had a second headquarters in Calcutta, now Kolkata. So there's a sort of intimate connection between us and India in terms of agricultural histories, and we'll talk more about that as the evening progresses. But over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Ollie. And just to say as well that you are in safe hands with Ollie and us this evening. We will look after you, but just obviously sort of just bear with us, be patient with us, because this is the first time that we've ever done anything like this. This is a new world for us as well. Totally steep learning curve, especially for me. I'm not very tech savvy, but we are with you online. We're not going to be deterred by a mere global pandemic. But do be patient with us. I don't think the tech will go wrong. We've got fantastic support from our colleague Jo behind the scenes, and Susanna as well. But yeah, do bear with us. And we've also got a playlist for you as well. I think Susanna might have put that in the chat bar. If not, I'm sure she will shortly. So you can sit back, relax, have the playlist about your person. As I say, we've cheers. We've got some cocktails here, and we will take you through the evening. I mentioned Diwali at the start. Ollie's just mentioned it then. It was Diwali at the weekend, and actually it's a 5-day festival. And so it's been going on for a little while now. But we've met and worked very closely with Shushmita Patti, who is the artistic director of Kala the Arts. And I believe Shushmita is with us this evening and going to say hello. Diwali is a festival of light. And so we've made that connection with light and darkness, which I say is the theme of Glow this evening. And also Diwali is a festival that celebrates harvest, so it links very closely with our collection and our holdings as well. And we've got some more information about the context of Diwali, and also the most beautiful dance and Rangoli, which is behind me, but that more of that later. But for now, if I can introduce and say hello to Shushmita. As I say, Shushmita is the artistic director of Kala the Arts. She's been working with MERL and also with Reading Museum for a little while now. working very hard, very collaboratively, and I'm delighted she can join us this evening. Hello, Shushmita.
Hi, Anna. That was an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ollie. Lovely talk, and Joe and Susanna. We have been quite lucky to work with the MERL and Reading Museum for the last few months, I would say. Diwali was, as Anna said, the weekend, but I think we are still in Diwali phase. So yes, wishing everybody a very happy Diwali. Wonderful sort of diva lamps behind Anna, a fantastic sort of background, I must say, very perfect. So I'm from Kala the Arts, the artistic director, and it's a partnership project with both the museums, the Reading Borough Council, the Being Human Festival, which is a national festival, and also the University of Reading. So we are really looking forward to all the acts, all the talks, etc., because we've never met them before. It has been sort of challenging times, but I think we've enjoyed working thoroughly, and some of the acts you will see this evening. So you have Bhajan, who has done some of the Rangoli at the MERL. We've also had our rehearsals at the MERL. It's a wonderful space. A lot of our students know about the MERL because we've been looking forward to actually coming and performing there live one day. It's a lovely space. So Kala the Arts is an arts and education charity based in the southwest of, so our office is in Basingstoke, but we work in Berkshire. And sort of further south, Southampton that way as well. We are also a performing company as well, so we create new and innovative work by artists, and that sort of goes to museums, sort of any open spaces, melas as well, and schools. You know, anybody who's interested in our work, we actually tour those projects, but they are all project funded. Throughout the year, we work with sort of, on average, 11 sort of artists. So it's a very artistic-led company. One of the main strengths of Kala the Arts is arts and education, which is working with schools, young people, communities. So we devise projects. In the Reading Museums, the way we worked was the children actually created their own dances. They got an arts award, and some of that work may be shown to children in India. So that's just an incredible piece of work they have been doing. Also, some of the communities we teach in Reading, so they'll be performing for you today as well. The training is very important part of our work, where some of these children have performed at the Point in Eastleigh. They have also performed at the South Bank, in Basingstoke, in our theatres there, and certain museums as well. So some of that work we have also done at the Abbey ruins, the professional work, which will be shown later on. The other part of Kala the Arts is training teachers. So we train teachers also in the art of South Asian dance. So we also have dialogues with them, and they sort of help us with projects they want to include in the communities, etc. And we devise some projects with them, and we work at various festivals, outdoor festivals, and sort of small scale festivals as well. So that is sort of the, in terms of teaching, we teach Kathak, which is a classical form of dance. So there are 8 classical forms of dance, which comes from India. And Kala the Arts sort of teaches Kathak, which is a North Indian classical dance. We also teach Bollywood to some of our kids and families for health and fitness. We also train people at the age of 50 plus as well. So we have got a senior sort of age group as well. We have music workshops, so people can train in various musical instruments like the tabla and string instruments, singing, etc. And Kala the Arts is also known for its work in Odissi, which is a classical form of dance. And we are more like a development agency for Odissi. We are one of the 3 sort of companies in the whole of the UK. It specializes in the form, and we do a lot of development work. So some of the work presented at the sort of Abbey ruins, the new work we have done, will be shown later on. That is sort of a new innovative work using the vocabulary of Odissi, and one performer is Kathak performer.
That's great. Thank you ever so much. And we're so excited about being able to show, as the culmination of our evening this evening, of Glow this evening, the film of Kala the Arts at the Abbey ruins, the Reading Abbey ruins. We've got other bits and pieces to share with you from Kala the Arts as well. But first of all, before we introduce the first film and move on to that, I'd also just like to say a very quick hello to our colleague Angela, who I believe is with us from home. As I was saying, we're very grateful to Milk Milk Bar Reading, who have supplied some cocktails here this evening, and also would normally supply to you in person when you're here, and hopefully will be with us next year for MERL Lates in the future. But I think Angela might be at home with a cocktail anyway.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I've got my cocktail here.
So Angela is our retail and visitor services supervisor and all-round wonderful person. She is the smile that meets and greets you, not necessarily with the glowing lights, but she's certainly the smile that meets and greets you when you come into the museum in normal times. But Angela, cheers. Good to see you at home, glowing.
I would raise a glass, but I can't because I haven't got a glass. So I'll point to this cider jar behind me.
Yeah, maybe a bit behind you. And Angela, you've got some exciting news about MERL and online shopping for us.
We have. We're all missing shopping in the museum. We've got a lovely gift shop, if any of you have ever been in, but at the moment you can't come in. But we have launched 2 exciting ways to buy from the shop if you're looking for that special gift. It is a gift time, buying time of the year. So we have, if you go to our website, you will see a link that takes you to our click and collect, where you can look at a range of products that we've put on there. We've specially selected to put on our click and collect, and they include craft sets. They also include some lovely Christmas cards from our Huntley and Palmer's collection. And you can click on that, you can pay for it online, and then we get your order together and you can pick it up from the shop. We've also
amazing, Angela. If people do want to, and I'm sure they will, want to buy from MERL, when do people need to be starting to order for in order to get their goodies by Christmas?
Well, I'd suggest that you put your orders in ASAP. Because yes, because I think once people know that they can buy, demand will be we won't be able to cope. That's
brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Angela. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your cocktail. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you.
And thank you. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the first film that we have for you this evening. It's a beautiful reflection. It's a celebration of light, philosophical perspectives, brought to you by Dr. Shalini Sinha, who is the lecturer in non-Western philosophy here at the University of Reading. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shalini Sinha, and I'm the lecturer in non-Western philosophy at the University of Reading. And today I'd like to talk about Diwali, some of its popular conceptions, but also its deeper philosophical meaning and significance. Now, Diwali is a festival which is celebrated all over India, but not only among Hindus, for whom it is perhaps the most popular festival, but also among the Jain communities and the Sikhs, and also among some of the Buddhist communities in Nepal. It's also celebrated across the Indian diaspora in the United Kingdom, in North America, in Australia and Europe. And it's celebrated as well in some countries like Thailand and Bali, in Indonesia, where there have historically been Indian communities and influence. Now, what unites these different traditions of Diwali, whether across the various parts of India who celebrate Diwali using different rituals, different festivities, what unites these different festivities within Hinduism and across different religions like Jainism, Sikhism, and so on, is the celebration of light, is the metaphor of light, Diwali as the power of light and its overcoming of darkness. And so, for example, in North India and South India, this is personified in mythology as the victory of Rama or of Krishna over the forces of evil. Or in Sikhism, it signifies the freeing of their guru, Har Gobind, from a Mughal prison. In Jainism, it marks the enlightenment of the founder of Jainism, Mahavira. Enlightenment, again, light. And this metaphor of life is centered on the philosophical idea that Light is the fundamental nature of reality. It is the light of existence, the light of life. And all of us, the human life, our bodies, our world, our thoughts, feelings, plants, animals, the life of nature, the life of the universe, the life of our minds and bodies, of our social life, are all aspects of this fundamental ground, this fundamental light or radiance through which all of this flourishes, comes into being. This light is the light of awareness or consciousness. From the moment we wake up, from the moment that the world comes into being for us, it is the light of awareness, the light of existence, which illuminates it. And there are various qualities of this light, which are appropriately signified by this idea of a row of lights or a garland of lights, which is Diwali, because Diwali comes from the word Deepavali, and Deepa means light, and Vali means necklace or row. So the fundamental light of existence is manifest and expressed in all the aspects of human life and the life of the universe, in its various aspects, the circle of lights, this row of lights. So the way in which the spirit of Diwali is invoked is that the timing is quite important. So it is celebrated at a time when nature has given its abundance. So farmers celebrate Diwali at the end of the harvest season. And it's celebrated on the night of the new moon. So again, the lunar calendar is very important. So farmers will give thanks for the abundance which has been given to them by nature. And it is on the night of the new moon because the moon signifies, of course, the new moon is the beginning of a new cycle of life. And of course, after the harvest, the new season. Now, the thanks are given by through those aspects, through those things which have been given by nature, which have been given by the bounties of that abundance, which is a key principle of nature. And it's celebrated with sweets, which is, of course, again signifies this abundance of nature, its sweetness. Now, this idea of light as the fundamental nature, the ground of our existence, of our flourishing, is personified in the deity, the goddess Lakshmi. And she is, if you like, worshipped or invoked in all parts of India, more or less. She's certainly the most popular deity who's celebrated and invoked at the time of Diwali. Because Lakshmi is an expression, a personification of that fundamental ground of our existence, of who we are, in its aspect of abundance and flourishing. She signifies life itself, its bounty. But we don't recognize the bounty of life, its abundance. We don't enact it normally in the way we should. And Diwali is the reminder to realize and recognize the presence of this principle of light and abundance everywhere in our lives. And this is recognized by enacting it, because Lakshmi, the presence of this light, this abundance, is not only there in nature, in the universe, in our social life, but it's there in our minds and bodies. We are constituted of this principle of abundance, but we don't recognize it. We are oblivious to it most of the time because we're driven by our various passions, our greed, our anxieties, our jobs and employment. So Diwali is a time where, given the cycles of nature, it's flourishing, and now it's Thanksgiving, given the light of the new moon, where the moon also signifies the mind, the imagination, and the beginning of the new light. This is a time when we bring the presence of Lakshmi into being. We invoke Lakshmi within and without. And we do this by enacting her qualities, by cultivating her qualities. So in the days prior to Diwali, all businesses will celebrate the coming to close of the financial year, and they will light lamps everywhere, and they will give gifts to their workers. In the home, all households will give gifts to their neighbors, their friends, to younger relatives. And this is an unconditional giving. without expecting anything in return, which again reenacts the quality of Lakshmi as unconditional giving, which is life itself. And the day of Diwali itself starts with various kinds of enactments of this kind of cleansing of the mind and body, which allows us to see the bountifulness of nature within and without. It starts with a certain kind of bathing, which might even be an oil bath, which is a purification of the body symbolically. And prior to Diwali, speech, one has to be careful about one's speech, not to be harsh in speech, and not to be angry in one's emotions. It's a cultivation of feelings of tenderness and joy, of sweet speech, warmth and affection, of generosity and unconditional giving, because it is only by practicing these qualities, these attributes of the deity Lakshmi, who's simply the principle of life and of existence, solely by practicing these qualities that we can truly invoke her presence. And in the home itself, this recognition of the power of light is through lighting little lamps within the house, outside the house. Businesses do this, public spaces, you will see lights lit up. Then there is the fireworks, and the fireworks signify something from mythology. It's the victory, the drums beating in victory when light overcomes darkness. So the firecrackers symbolize that. So each of these activities and rituals are meant to remind us of the innate presence of this principle of light and its quality of abundance and flourishing in our everyday life. When we come to the time of worship on the night of Diwali, the goddess is invoked. There is a statue or a picture of the goddess, and various offerings are made. And each attribute of the goddess, her color, her expression, the ornaments she's wearing, the items which surround her, they each signify some attribute of the world, of the universe, of our minds and bodies, or our social life, which is simply an aspect of her unconditional giving and flourishing, of her unconditional bountifulness. So we are reminded of this at every turn. And most of all, we are reminded of this, and when we invoke the presence of Lakshmi, we invoke her presence in the world outside, in that ritual space, in the home where the worship takes place, and in ourselves, in our own minds and bodies, because that is our own essential nature. And this is what we want to bring into prominence, into existence and expression. So Lakshmi is invoked by offering sweets, which have already been distributed as gifts, as an enactment of her bountifulness. But these sweets are offered to her, as are dry fruits and nuts, which too have been given as gifts to others. But also things like gold coins, which signify commerce and material bountifulness and abundance. But also various powders, which might be, and turmeric, which might be orange and red in color. And these symbolize the life of the body, our blood. They're green offerings, which symbolize the fertility and abundance of nature. So all of these offerings are reminders and marks of all the different aspects, of all aspects of life and the world, which are simply aspects of Lakshmi, of that profound and primordial light, which manifests as light and life. And during this period, a short period of worship, these various offerings of sweets and other items are given to Lakshmi and are received back blessed. And people will ask for various kinds of blessings. It might be material blessings, it might be blessings with respect to health, which is symbolized by, say, red color, the color of blood. It might be requesting a bountiful harvest. It might be requesting harmony in the family. But it's in fact requesting all of these things. But most of all, it's invoking the presence of Lakshmi within, because through this kind of worship and invocation, her presencing in one's life, in one's awareness, one is not only rejuvenated and ready for the next season, for the next cycle of abundance, but one hopes to keep on expressing and recognizing this presence of Lakshmi within and embodying her presence in the world after Diwali itself. So Diwali basically is a celebration of the light of existence and of life as flourishing and abundance in all its different aspects. But its timing and its place and the symbolism is meant to accentuate it at a time of natural bounty, at the time when there is the beginning of a new cycle of the lunar month and of a new cycle of spiritual recognition and enlightenment, as well as a new commercial, material, and social rejuvenation and harmony.
So I'm really delighted to have with us here, live as part of GLOW, Dr. Shalini Sinha. Thank you ever so much for sharing that with us, Shalini. That was wonderful. I was just sort of saying to you then offline that what I was really struck by with that talk that you gave was this idea of cultivating the qualities of Lakshmi, that's an idea of like unconditional giving and warmth and sweet thoughts. That was what really struck me about the work that you were presenting.
Yes, I think this is an idea which is very, very important, not only for Diwali, but for almost all festivals. And it's central to the philosophy which underlies I would say the Hindu way of looking at things, but it's also something which is there in Buddhism and in Jainism and in Sikhism. And this is the idea that the deities such as Lakshmi really personify a certain essence which is within ourselves as well as outside in the world. It's this idea of the inner presence and the outer presence are sort of brought together and invoked in the ritual space of the puja or of worship. And it's very much like going to church, except you're doing it at home, that you're creating, in this case, rather than simply walking in, a certain kind of a sacred space. And sacred simply means that your true presence, your true qualities are there being elicited. And that requires a bit of help from oneself, that one begins to practice it before Diwali, the speech which is tender and caring and not harsh, the emotions which are loving and kind and not angry or bitter and things like that. And one begins to give unconditionally to friends, relatives, and people who are working for oneself. And then within that ritual space, then it's a giving to all the elements, to the abundance of nature, to those elements which make up our bodies and the world outside. Our senses are purified and clarified, our thoughts. So in fact, all the aspects of our personality and of our embodiment and of the world itself are meant to be purified, because we're simply accessing what we already are truly.
That's a wonderful way of putting it. That sort of idea of cultivating that inner goddess is something that perhaps we should or God is something that we should all look to. And that idea of abundance and bounty of nature as well is something that, you know, we've all found during lockdown, being outside, being at one with nature. I think we've all found that, you know, regardless of faith background, we can all tap into, hopefully that inner strength, that inner world, to be able to become better people. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for sharing that film with us, and happy Diwali.
And to you as well, to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Handing back over to Ollie now, who I believe is out and about in the galleries. Ollie.
I am out and about. I'm in our Country Lives gallery. And I'm here because I want to introduce the next talk. So behind me is an extraordinary wall hanging that was on display at the Festival of Britain, our first our first speaker from Colour of the Arts mentioned the South Bank connection to their practice. The Festival of Britain, of course, was held at the South Bank site back in 1951, the same year that the Museum of English Rural Life was founded. So that's something we want to celebrate next year, our 70th anniversary, and I'll come back to that hopefully later on this evening. The next speaker is going to talk to us about rural electrification. So I just wanted to just hint at some of the things that come up in that and how they connect to maybe my own personal and family history. My father was telling me that the house I grew up in the house that he grew up in, only was connected to mains electricity in 1957, which may seem like a very long time ago, but of course, that means my father was around 13 or 14 when the house was connected to mains electricity. Before that, it ran off a generator, and the generator, he said, was in the log shed, or what was the log shed when I lived in that house. And in that space, they had this extraordinary diesel generator that was connected to some batteries, and the batteries were these accumulator batteries filled with liquid. So you'd run it once a week, and it would charge up these batteries, and it was only ever powerful enough to power the lights. But that's within one generation, that shift from very difficult to access electricity and mains electricity in the countryside through to now, when mains electricity seems like the norm. And the closest parallel I can think of is really rural broadband and the arguments and discussions around getting fast networks out into the countryside today. Jeremy Burchard is based in the history department of the University of Reading. He's a long-standing partner of the MERL, and he's worked with us enormously closely over the years. Currently, we're partners in his Changing Landscapes, Changing Lives AHRC-funded research network. And as part of that, we're really excited to have the artist and photographer Ingrid Pollard coming to work with us over the coming year to develop practice around greater ideas of diversity and access to the countryside. Ingrid's best known for her 1980s work, Pastoral Interlude, which placed people of Afro-Caribbean origin in the landscapes of the Lake District and created a really powerful discussion around questions of access and exclusion in those sorts of spaces, a really critical conversation to be having in light of the Black Lives Matter movement that we've experienced emerging over the last few months. So I'm really excited to hand over to our next talk of the evening, which is Jeremy Burchard talking about transforming the countryside, the electrification of rural England.
We take things like electricity for granted to a large extent, I suppose, most of us these days. But some of these things, which are such fundamental parts of our lives, really weren't for many people, particularly in the countryside, until really much more recently than we might expect. So I want to say a little bit about rural electrification. And it's a fascinating issue that I've been doing some work on with some of my colleagues, with Paul Brassley from the University of Exeter, and with other colleagues too who've worked on this. And it turns out that electrification was a really quite crucial and in some ways contentious issue in the countryside for really from, I suppose, the late 19th century right through until very recent times. In fact, it was only, was it about 3 or 4 years ago that an article appeared on the BBC, on the BBC website, and they claimed that the last village in Wales, which had not been joined up to the national grid, had just been hooked up to the national grid. So in a way, this is a story which is still, well, is in some ways, actually, I suppose, still going on, or at least is a story that's sort of continued until very, very recent times. So I suppose the question that Paul and I started out with when we became interested in this subject was two things really, I suppose. What was the sort of timing of rural electrification? When did it actually happen? And what impact had it had on people's lives? And it turned out that it took a lot longer for electricity to reach the countryside than the towns. As that example from the BBC, the last village in Wales, allegedly, it depends what you call a village, of course, but anyway, they told us the last village in Wales to be connected to the national grid. So it took a lot longer for electricity to reach the countryside than the towns. And when we began to investigate this, it turned out that some of the reasons for this were what you might expect and were actually really fairly obvious. So to a large extent, it does come down to cost, as so many things do. And the problem for rural people is that they're thinly scattered. Now, if you're an electricity company, then naturally you kind of are looking to make a financial return. You're looking to make a profit. So what you really want is a large group of people gathered together. And if you've got that, that means that you can provide your electricity at rather low cost to a lot of people. So you've got a lot of consumers, and the sort of miles, the number of miles of cable that you have to lay down of wiring is not that great. So that turned out to be, as you might expect, a kind of a big problem with rural electrification, is that it was just not very cost effective. And in fact, it was only really after the nationalisation of electricity supplies in 1947 by that kind of that post-war Labour government, the Attlee government, that a really kind of that the problem really began to get solved, and that large numbers of rural people began to get an electricity supply. So in fact, as late as 1939, there are various estimates, and we don't really have precise figures, but as late as 1939, it was estimated that 2 out of every 3 people in the countryside still didn't have mains electricity. And the figures were kind of even worse for the more remote kind of outlying farms. So it really was a kind of cost thing, and the private supply of electricity, which was what had existed before 1947, was lots of kind of little kind of private companies, and supplemented by some kind of local authorities. Some local authorities also got involved in electricity supply, but even for the local authorities, there were also kind of cost constraints. So even they weren't that good at, they were mainly urban based, and even they weren't really very effective at reaching out to the more remote rural communities. So there was a kind of big hidden problem of rural disadvantage. And that only, as I say, really began to be tackled effectively after the nationalisation of electricity supplies in 1947. But it also became clear that in some ways the picture was a bit more complicated than this, because there are other ways, of course, of getting electricity apart from being hooked up to the national grid. So in particular, a lot of farmers had used generators prior to the arrival of mains electricity on their farms. And of course, some farmers still do use generators. There are still remote farms which aren't connected to the national grid, and they use generators. So they could be quite effective for some things. They could be quite cost effective. But there were problems with generators, we found, and one of the really crucial problems was that they weren't always reliable. In the early days of main, there would be a problem sometimes with main supply too to remote areas. It wasn't always absolutely reliable, and it depends what you're using the electricity for. But for some farmers, that could actually be a big problem. So, for example, if you're using electricity to provide heat and light for your poultry, especially for kind of for laying hens, then that's really absolutely critical, because if the temperature falls too low, even for a few hours, the young chicks will die. So there are some things where it really matters to have continuous and reliable supply. So it's not just about, do you have electricity or do you not have electricity? It's also about, is your supply a reliable supply? So that was another major issue we discovered. But the thing that perhaps was most surprising to us is that, although, as I've said, there are certain kind of there did turn out to be some kind of some uses of electricity which were really important for farmers. And I've given one example, and another example was when milking machines were introduced. Now, milking machines only really became widespread after the Second World War as part of that great kind of transformation of British agriculture, vast kind of scale of mechanization, huge increases in output and productivity. It was really a kind of second agricultural revolution, and milking machines came in a big way then. And of course, you need electricity for that. So there are certain kind of quite specific uses on a farm for which electricity turns out to be very, very important. But the thing that surprised Paul and me when we researched this is that, in fact, it turned out that, in contrast to industry, and I guess in contrast to domestic uses, electricity wasn't really all that useful for most farmers most of the time. And part of the problem, of course, is that farming is a very kind of land extensive activity. It's very spread out, to put it simply. So farmers are kind of working across kind of widely spread fields. And you can't kind of stretch wires kind of right across all those fields. That's just would be far too expensive and not remotely feasible. So it wasn't really possible to get the electricity out there to the fields where maybe it could have been useful for farmers. So in the end, it proved that for most kind of routine day-to-day activities on the farm, electricity couldn't really be applied to it. So, as I say, electricity was a revolution in certain kind of industries, but not really. It was helpful, but it was not really a revolution in agriculture, and that really wasn't something that we'd realised. So, by and large, I suppose, although farmers were disadvantaged by not by the kind of slowness of mains electrification to arrive on the farms, for most of them, it wasn't actually a crippling disadvantage, but that was not the whole story, because what became clear the more we read is that there was one way, and a vitally important way, in which electricity was truly transformative. To use a very appropriate electrical metaphor, electricity did transform the countryside. But the way it transformed the countryside was not by transforming agriculture, it was by transforming rural life, rural social life. And what it did above all was light up the evenings. Now, at this time of year, we can really appreciate that, because it's dark outside. It gets dark. On a cloudy day, it will be dark just about by 4. It's nearly dark as I'm recording this at 4:45 in the afternoon. So now it's just very hard to imagine. It's just very hard to envisage how dark the countryside was in the autumn and the winter for more or less half the year. That there were kind of other forms of lighting, of course, but they really weren't very good. They were relatively expensive. Candles were relatively expensive. There were paraffin lamps as well. They were also relatively expensive and not all that reliable, and didn't actually cast a very bright light. And all of these kind of things with flames could be dangerous as well, of course. So the alternatives to electric lighting in the countryside really weren't good at all. So electrification lit up the countryside indoors. It's in the houses, in the farmhouses, in the cottages. That's the absolutely crucial thing. And why that makes so much difference is because women can read, and men too, of course. But I think with the way in which kind of the way in which kind of farm life in particular often tended to work, women spent a lot more time indoors typically. So it's especially relevant to especially liberating, I think, for farm women in that respect. But men, women, and children can all read in the evenings. Families can do things like play board games in the evening. It seems a small thing, but these things can matter. And children can do their homework. It just has vast implications. The arrival of electric lighting on the remoter farms and in the villages. So although it turned out not at all to be what we've been expecting that electrification would have turned out to be a crucial technology for farming. In fact, our research demonstrated that electrification had been a revolution in the countryside, but a revolution in people's social lives rather than in the economics of farming, which is what we've been originally expecting. Thanks very much.
And thank you ever so much to Jeremy for sharing that film with us. We've all just been sharing our sort of memories, and as Ollie was saying, his father's memories of of power and electricity and now broadband in rural England and beyond, and the difference that it makes now, the sort of new world, if you like, that we are all living in now. It's a totally different world for my daughters, for our children, in terms of sort of devices and electricity that is just totally taken for granted. But we do still sit down and play the odd family board game. So very odd family board game. So I'm just delighted now to talk to you about the next film that we're going to show you. I was privileged enough to be here in the studio at the MERL with visual artist who's been working with Carl of the Arts, Bajan Hunjan, who I've known actually for quite a long time. So it was lovely to see her and work with her again. And she created this beautiful Rangoli. You can just about see it behind me, but we'll show you a film in a minute that's been edited beautifully by our colleague Claire here at the MERL. The Rangoli is a very traditional part of Diwali, but Bajan's taken a real spin on it and used as inspiration a really amazing object from the MERL collections, a harvest jug, which Ollie's going to talk a little bit about now before we play the film.
Yeah, so I'm here in the Year on the Farm gallery, and this is the section devoted to summer, and you can see in front of me this reaper. So this is a piece of harvesting technology actually developed for the Midwest of America and exported back across here. So from a sort of appropriated colonized landscape brought back to the UK and had a big impact on the landscape of England. But further over here, also in the summer section, we have the jug that Anna's been talking about, and which has inspired the Rangoli currently in the MERL studio, and which was shared with colleagues in India at the weekend as part of that International Agricultural Museums event. It has on the side of it a poem, and it says, "Harvest is come, busy now in making of the barley mow. If you the barley mow neglect, good ale you cannot then expect." So there's a connection here between harvest, celebration, and drinking and making merry. That wasn't always the case. When harvest festivals were introduced in the church context, it became a much more sobrietous affair, celebrating harvest. But that's a relatively recent invention. That's a late 19th century invention. The connection between sort of raucous and big indulgent harvest and festivities at that moment in the calendar year is long standing. And it continued this year in a digital format. I can't drink this because I've already drunk it, but this is an empty bottle from the greatest online agricultural show, which happened earlier this year. And they also produced an online harvest festival for which they also produced a beer. This will become part of the MERL collections. We bought a crate of it during lockdown. I was lucky enough to consume half of it, and half of it will enter with the beer intact into the collections. We also produced for that same event and the harvest event, an amazing wagon exhibition. So I'm standing right next to a wagon that would have been used to bring in the harvest. And that wagon exhibition went live for the Greatest Online Harvest Festival. So we've been participating online in a similar way with other events throughout the year. And next to that is another jug. And this was also bought during lockdown, bought in connection with, as I said, it's the 70th anniversary of the museum's foundation next year, founded in 1951. And we've also got great collections connected with the Festival of Britain, like that wall hanging that I was standing in front of earlier this evening. And we bought this, which is a Festival of Britain 1951 Bideford's Trade Exhibition jug. So it's very similar in form, if not size, to the harvest jug. And that's because it's made only about 20 miles away. So Bideford is about 20 miles away, or possibly even closer. It's very close, it's about 20 minutes drive from Barnstaple, where this amazing jug was made. This is 18th, or I think actually early 19th century, and this is actually much more recent, so 20th century. But the jug and its extraordinary images feature in this extraordinary Rangoli. So
they do.
Enjoy the film.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yes, if you've just joined us as well, we are Anna Jones and Dr. Ollie Douglas, here with you live at the MERL, the Museum of English Rural Life, our online late glow as part of the Being Human Festival. And I am delighted to share with you now the film of Bajan Hunjan, the artist, the visual artist who's been working with Carla the Arts and the MERL, with her Harvest Jug inspired Rangoli. Thank you. So, as I was saying, the Rangoli film was shot here in the studio. I was privileged enough to be with Bajan when she was making it a couple of weeks ago. We obviously would have loved for you to be here live with her tonight and making it, contributing to it. That's part of the Diwali, part of the Rangoli tradition, but she's made it nonetheless, and we're able to bring it to you in film form, if not in flesh form, tonight.
Hello, my name is Bajan Hunjan and I'm a visual artist. And here I am collaborating with MERL and Colonial the Arts and creating Rangoli for the festival of Diwali.
So in this particular context, what we have is the general design of the Rangoli has Lakshmi's lotus, and the overall lotus might actually look quite symmetrical, but if you carefully look, it's one continuous line that makes the lotus. It doesn't really have a beginning or an end. In the middle, what we have is, we've contemporized it because with MERL, we've used part of their collection, which is a harvester jug. And the sun is quite a prominent feature of that. So we've got the sun in the middle because it is time of harvest, and then we have the energy emanating from the middle, which symbolizes light. So what we also have is in the middle of our sun feature, we have our 4-petaled symbol, and this makes the connection with the compass points of the earth. It really grounds the whole piece and is the central part that emanates energy, and in a way it's also the focus of the piece, because it's from that particular energy, the divine energy that emanates within the rest of the universe. So we've got the rays coming out from the sun, from the light. For Diwali, it's really important because it symbolizes the light over darkness, but it also symbolizes, yes, it's light over darkness in a natural sense, when the sun comes on, there's light. But then we also have the night, which symbolizes, of course, the darkness. So they are equal polarities, they're opposites. But it also means that within our human psyche, we are evolving into better human beings. We are bringing more good into our life and erasing away the negative forces, so that we can become a better human being and we can share things with each other, because Diwali is actually a time of sharing. Of course, it was a time when Rama and Sita came back from their 14 years of Banvas, as we call, of exile, and it was celebrated because it was again the good over the evil. On the outer periphery of our Rangoli, we've got our lamps, which again are continuation of the Lakshmi symbol. And Lakshmi, as we know, is the goddess of wealth. And so before Diwali, the homes would be cleaned in India properly cleansed, and the rangolis would be in the outer entrance to the house to welcome Lakshmi when she comes to the house, but also to welcome all the guests that come to your house and bring good energy. So Rangolis also in different parts of India have different names. They're sometimes called Alpana in Bengal, sometimes they're called Komal, so there are different names for it as well. So in our Rangoli on the outer periphery, we've got our light lamps, and then we've got the birds flying, because that's another feature which we've taken from our the harvester jug at MERL. And then it also has 4 different hand gestures called mudras, which are particular to Odissi dance, which Kala the Arts are using in their dance today. And so it's our connection of our Rangoli with our dance, which is a prominent part of this project, as we know. The materials that we've used here are, we're using color pigment, which is mostly from pastels, and then we're also using grain, we're using rice, and we're using lentils, which is moong and normal masoor lentils. They add color to it. But also traditionally, we know that rangolis were made with using just rice flour in the outer compounds or the entrance of the house. And they were totally environmental friendly because they'd be made with rice flour, and then the little insects would come and eat them. So over time, you actually never cleaned that place. It would actually be the little insects who would be fed around that time. Birds would come and feed. So it actually fed into the nature, and it was part of the everyday cycle of nature, which is really very beautiful. So what we have here is we have our almost nearly completed Rangoli. Normally the Rangoli would be done with different members of the household coming together, cleaning the space and designing the whole thing and bringing it to life. But in this case, we haven't been able to get the collaboration with other people. Otherwise, we would have loved to have lots of community members who would have come and contributed to this particular piece.
So it was a really brief way of showing you an amazing process that Bajan went through, but it's been wonderful to keep the Rangoli here. And although it would have been even more amazing to have shared it with you all live, it's great that it is still here, and staff and students at the university are still able to see it here in the studio. So yeah, thank you ever so much to Bajan for creating it. Actually, what you didn't really get a sense of from the film there was that she's also used some flowers, some marigolds from the MERL garden as part of the finishing touches as well. So that makes it really special and connected back to us and our collection. And thinking about our collection, I will go back to Ollie now, who I believe is still roaming in the galleries and is going to talk to us a little bit about lights and lamps and candles and light that relates to our holdings.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I'm back up here in the open access stores. So normally during a late, we would have some objects out on the mezzanine study area table for people to look at and explore. And it's also a space that when we're open to the public, you can come in and experience. So if you haven't been before, I would urge you to come up and have a look. I'm just going to show you a few things from the collection that relate to some elements of the things we're talking about. So here we have some of the lighting technologies that are represented in the MERL collection. This is a tiny snapshot of a huge amount of material, and there's a very good reason for that. The reason is that some of the early folk collectors who gathered this kind of material, both in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, including those who collected the founding collections of this museum, were very interested in lighting technologies. And the reason for that is that these offer an incredibly powerful metaphor for changing technologies and for ideas of progression. They were very much influenced by late 19th century anthropology, and ideas of progression and sort of cultural evolution were the mainstay of that period, and influenced the foundation of institutions like MERL. And this is a legacy that we're grappling with, a problematic legacy, because obviously we don't think about technologies evolving in quite those this begat that kind of ways anymore. So they would have imagined that early technologies, including flint and steel for making fires with candles, and rushlight holders. So these have a little clip that holds a rushlight dipped in tallow, oil lamps of different types, some earlier, some later, and then other candlesticks and forms of candle. They would have lined these up effectively and imagined that there was a progression here of technologies, but there are lots of complicating factors in there. And the complicating factors include candle taxes, which made them problematic to get hold of or expensive to get hold of at particular times, and also lack of access to candles during the Second World War, when, oddly enough, rushlights became popular again. So there's sort of strange social pressures and economic pressures and other pressures that mean that those transitions of one technology to another don't operate in a linear way, a straightforward way. But when we think about social history, when we think about recomplicating that narrative and imagining how life must have been in the past, we've also got to think about that sensory experience of being surrounded by different forms of light. And if you imagine candlelight, I can't imagine it here because I'm surrounded by lots of flammable collections, including lots of straw craft that might not survive if I lit fires up here. But candlelight is very different to gaslight or to electric light. And even the modern lights that we experience now, LEDs and those sort of light efficient and environmentally friendly lights, have a much different feel to them. When you walk into a room, sometimes that light bulb glows slightly dimmer and slowly wakes up with those modern environmentally friendly lights. So we've got to imagine what those spaces must have been like. So much as Jeremy was saying in his talk earlier, some of those cottage environments must have been extremely dark and very, very sort of spooky and feel considerably different. So that history of emotions and sensory experience really comes into play here. And I think that comes into play when you're talking about the lights behind you, Anna. They look very atmospheric and very exciting.
I am muted. There we go. I'm back. It does. It looks very glowing behind me.
Multi-sensory.
Now into the next film, which again is from Carl of the Arts. As we've been saying, Ollie and I are live here at the Museum of English Rural Life as part of our online Glow Late. We would have loved to have welcomed these community dancers here this evening. Unfortunately, like all of us, they've been locked down and had all sorts of things compromised, but we are really pleased that they have still brought us their ode to the goddess of arts, Mantangi, to us from their houses and their gardens. So here's the next clip, with thanks to the community dancers and students of Carl of the Arts.
वीणा उपोला लयन्ती माणिक्य वीणा उपोला लयन्ती মহেন্দ্র নীলাদ্যুতি কোমলাঙ্গী মাতঙ্গ কন্যা মনসা স্মরামি চতুর্ভুজে চন্দ্রকলাবতা সে কুচোন্নতে কুঙ্কুমরাগ শোভনে পুণ্ড্রেক্ষু পাশাঙ্কুশ পুষ্পবাণ হস্তে নমস্তে জগদেক মাতা নমস্তে জগদেক মাতা মাতা মোর কত শ্যামা মাতঙ্গী মদসারিণী মাতা মোর কত শ্যামা মাতঙ্গী মদসারিণী গুরুজা কটাক্ষ কল্যাণী ঊর্জাত কটাক্ষ কল্যাণী কদম্ব বনবাসিনী মাতা মোর কত শ্যামা জয় মাতঙ্গ তনয়ে জয় নীলোৎপল দ্যুতে জয় সঙ্গীত রসিকে জয় লীলা সুখপ্রিয়ে
So thank you again to students from Carl of the Arts for that beautiful ode to the goddess of arts, Mantangi. And again, if you've just joined us, my name's Anna. I'm coming to you live from the Museum of English Rural Life as part of our GLOW online late as part of the Being Human Festival. Thank you for being with us this evening. Also, just to sort of reference back to Bajan's film with the Rangoli, the mudra that was being talked about, the hand gestures were coming across so beautifully in that film. And we've had some lovely comments in the chat bar as well, particularly picking up on a comment from Heather from Seattle, who was saying quite rightly, and we all agree with you here, that it's beautiful to see them still doing their dancing, the socially distanced dancing in their gardens and in their home spaces, and beautiful to have that traditional dress that they are wearing as well. So thank you again to Carl of the Arts students. Also delighted to bring you now live is Priya Brown, who is a trustee at Carl of the Arts, and Priya is coming to us to show us a little clip from her front room, I believe, Priya, of some deer lamps, which are very much part of the Diwali tradition.
That's right. Yes. Hello and welcome. And thank you so much for having me here. Really appreciate it. I'm here as a trustee for Carl of the Arts, and I'm here to talk about the diyas. And their importance in Hinduism, basically. So diyas they go by various names. Diya, Dio, Deya, Divas, Deepa, Deepam, or Deepak. So there's quite a few. And basically they are about that they are little oil lamps that are lit to represent enlightenment, wisdom, and knowledge. And traditionally, diyas are a form of earthenware that are made from clay, and they are handmade using the thumb to push a well into the ball of clay, and then they're shaped and then fired in a kiln, ready for painting or decorating and lighting on special occasions. So I've got here with me this one, which is a handmade clay piece. So that's where the thumb would have gone in and would have been shaped, and then placed into the kiln and ready, fired up so it's ready to use. You can have them decorated as well. So that one's just been painted with a gold rim around the outside. And then this one, which is quite a modern sort of version, it's the clay pot, but it's been painted with acrylics. And you can make all the sort of little designs there, kind of like, you know, mimicking those Rangoli patterns that you might see. So yeah, so diyas, you can get all sorts of different ones. And as I say, diyas really represent at the heart of any celebration, really. It's about having that presence in prayer and ritual. It's a central part that it plays in auspicious functions, as well as religious occasions, and when you're embarking on new ventures. So the beautiful diyas, they hold a deep significance, and they are symbolic, as I said, of our journey into enlightenment. And the oil in the diya symbolizes the negativity that might be in our human mind. The wick is symbolic of the Atma, and the Atma is a Sanskrit word which means essence or breath, soul. And when you light the diyas, that signifies getting rid of those negative thoughts that one might have. So diyas are really essential in Hinduism because it also signifies purity, goodness, good luck, and power. And the presence of light means the non-existence of darkness and evil forces, hence why in Diwali, millions of lights are lit up to get rid of the darkness, particularly because Diwali falls on the new moon day. So that means that there is no moonlight as such. There's also that deeper significance as well, like I said, about the oil and the wick and the light itself. And actually what the diyas do represent are the 5 elements as well. So earth element is obviously represented by the diya itself, made out of the clay. And then you have oil and cotton that also are earth elements. Fire is the light itself. And the sky element is the light around the flame, which is the space around the earth. Air is the oxygen that is diffused from the air to the wick. And water are the little molecules that are formed from the combustion of the oil. So when we light the oil lamp on Diwali particularly, we are symbolically representing the universe at our doorstep, which I thought was quite a nice little segue, if you like, to go into my little display here that I've set up.
our doorstep and the universe on your table beside you.
My little mini universe here.
Amazing, Priya.
Next to
We've
me.
got a close-up there of it. Yes, share with us that.
So you're right here. I've just got, there we go. So you can just see I've got some various different styles there. Simply because I thought I'd showcase the different types that you can get. So you do have the brass ones, you have the clay ones. My son has made a wooden one, which is in the middle. It's the star shape there.
Oh,
it's a bit of MDF board, but he's covered it in glitter, and we use that to put the tea lights in as well.
Amazing.
And then we've got a little clay pot that they've made as well at school. And it's just, you know, it's a great way to really sort of you know, get involved, and you can make them as special or as simple as you like, and they all mean that very same thing. You know, it's about light over darkness, and
that's wonderful, Priya. Thank you. And like you say, from the very simple to the very profound, all in one lamp. And a really interesting. I didn't know about that sort of idea of the 4 elements being part of it as well. That's really interesting to hear. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Priya.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And just our final film in this section are some more dancers at the moment doing the dance of Krishna, I believe. Now, I've not seen this film before. It's come to us this evening. Again, we were really hoping that they would be able to be with us live. We all know the reasons why that isn't the case. But it was almost live. We so wanted to try and make it happen, but as I was saying earlier, we are in new worlds here of technology and timing, and this just wasn't possible to be able to bring you live dancers via Zoom and all of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes here. But we're still absolutely delighted that Kala the Arts dancers are bringing you the dance of Krishna. Thank you so much again to Carla the Arts and to Priya for sharing with us their dance and their Dia lamps. And we've got a wonderful final treat from Carla the Arts coming up for you at about 9:30. It's a beautiful dance and music and singing that was filmed about a week or so ago. When we knew the lockdown was happening, we managed to get a quick film done at the beautiful Reading Abbey ruins. So we've got that, the highlight of Carla the Arts coming up towards the end. But now I'm just going to hand back over to Ollie, who I believe is in a different part of the gallery now.
Thanks, Anna. I'm in the Making Rural England gallery. You can see this enormous jigsaw puzzle in the background behind me. This is a gallery that's all about the ways in which we come to think about the countryside as a sort of rural idyll, as a sort of ideal space. And that's something Jeremy Burchard, our speaker from earlier, has written on. We have a set piece display here that's all about hearth and home and those ideas of the home. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but I just want to show you very quickly what sits opposite. This is a painting by Thomas Henry Hoffland of the old White Knights campus, the old White Knights estate. So this is where the White Knights campus of the University of Reading now sits. And this was created as a sort of man-made landscape, a sort of landscaped space with pleasure gardens and follies as a sort of romantic landscape for the Marquis of Blandford. And the Marquis of Blandford is familiarly connected to the Spencer Churchills, so to Blenheim. So there's a really interesting link here to Blenheim and the Blenheim estate. And Blenheim Palace, believe it or not, is the site of a filming for a feature film, a Bollywood film called Kabhi Khushi Kabhie Gham. So there's Bollywood dancing at Blenheim Palace. And that's a film that also features amazing sequences of Dia lamps and of Diwali. So it's well worth watching if you want to get a sense of overview of both dance and popular culture and reimaginings of the English rural in that sort of reimagining of what that Spencer Churchill Blenheim landscape is all about. And in this space here, we have lots of objects that speak powerfully to romantic ideas about the English country past, about English hearths, homes and kitchens. That there is a Huntley Palmer's biscuit tin in the shape of a farmhouse. We've got lots of sort of things to do with cooking on the table over there, but some of these are actually not quite as homely and pleasant as you might think. Sitting at the front there, we have sugar cutters. And sugar cutters, of course, hark back to a really problematic past, the history of enslavement and the practice of slavery in the Caribbean. And this is something that crops up in the National Trust's recent report about the history of colonial connections of many of our country houses and our rural heritage in this country, something that David Olusoga referred to in his introduction to the Being Human Festival of the Humanities this year, a really important shift in the way we're thinking about rural life, country history, and those big estates. But I want to finish just on a slightly poorer bit of the countryside, not big estates, but the sort of hearths and homes of the English country poor. This is a sort of mock-up of a labouring cottage of the English past, and instead of the sort of riches and warmth of home baking and imported Swedish agas and other exciting objects like that, we have some of those poorer forms of lighting technology up there at the back, the rush lights and some of the candle holders and a candle cage to stop you from burning your house and your very few possessions down. And then here at the front, another form of oil lamp, a cruisy lamp. This is actually a traditionally Scottish form of lamp, But I'm going to hand over to Anna with this cruisy lamp, and she can take it from here.
So thank you, Ollie. So the cruisy lamp, as Ollie says, this one is from Scotland, as I understand, but they're based on lamps from antiquity, from ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and that is a beautiful segue into our next film. It's brought to us by our colleague Jane Holly, who is the assistant curator at the Ure Museum of Greek Archaeology here at Reading University. The Ure Museum contains one of the most important collections of Greek antiquities in the United Kingdom, and it's part of the family of museums, along with us at the MERL, family of museums and special collections at Reading University. So delighted to share with you the next film from Jane Holly, assistant curator at the Ure Museum, about ancient Egyptian solar divinities in the Ure. Thank you.
Hello everybody and welcome to Glow MERL Late. My name's Jane Holly and I'm the Assistant Curator at the Ure Museum of Greek Archaeology, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about ancient Egyptian solar divinities that you can find in the Ure Museum. So just to start off, there were hundreds of gods and goddesses worshipped in ancient Egypt. This was over sort of 3,000 years of time. But one of the most important was the solar divinities, in particular the sun god Ra. So how do we see Ra and the sun gods and other solar divinities in the Ure Museum? So one of the first pieces we have is this stela here of a gentleman called Serap. It is damaged, but there's lots of iconography in here which worship and celebrate Ra Harakti, and he was one of the forms of the sun god Ra, in particular in the morning. So first of all, we have at the top left, we have the sun disk with vulture wings. Here we have the hieroglyphs which name that the two figures are worshipping Ra Harakti. And just here, although the figure of Ra Harakti has been damaged, you can see his solar disk here. So even if he wasn't named in the hieroglyphs, we'd know that the two figures are worshipping Ra because of his headdress there. And then finally, just to further link with the importance of the ancient Egyptians with the solar divinities is the symbol here of the sky. And this is saying that the sun disk and the wings are literally holding up the sky. Another stela we have, which is from the Greco-Roman period, so quite late in ancient Egyptian history, is this one here. And you can see a very kind of Roman figure in the centre with Osiris on the left and Anubis on the right. So these are typical sort of funerary gods that you would typically find on funerary stela. But again, if you look at the top of this stela, you can see a sun disk with wings. So although not typically about the funerary beliefs, the sun disk was still very important. We also in the museum have quite a number of different scarabs. Many of you might have seen the film The Mummy, which talks about these scarabs being these sort of flesh-eating monsters. They weren't at all, they were dung beetles. And the ancient Egyptians would see a dung beetle rolling a ball of dung across the sand and would link that with the movement of the sun across the sky in the day. They would also recognise the fact that they didn't understand, but dung beetles lay their eggs within the ball of dung, and then all of a sudden you get sort of these hundreds of baby scarabs just emerging almost from nowhere. So they linked that with sort of rebirth and regeneration. So the sun journeyed across the sky in ancient Egyptian religion and had different sort of personifications at different times. And the scarab in the form of Khepri was the sun in the morning. We also have this lovely figure of Sekhmet, and it's only sort of that big in real life. Sekhmet was a daughter of the sun. And there's this really cool myth surrounding her, that she's this fierce creature. She's a warrior goddess. And at one point during ancient the people of Egypt, or mankind, were plotting against Ra, and Ra didn't like this. So he sent his daughter in the form of Hathor at first to Earth to punish them. She quickly turned into Sekhmet and started on this sort of rampage where she started killing all the people and drinking their blood. Ra kind of thought to himself, well, this isn't good, because actually if everybody's dead, there's nobody to worship me. So he dyed beer red, and he put it throughout Egypt. Sekhmet drank it, thinking it was blood, soon got quite drunk, passed out, and was appeased and woke up again as Hathor, a nice calm goddess. This piece here is a tiny fragment from a vessel, a drinking vessel, with the face of Hathor, another goddess, daughter goddess of Ra. And here you can see that she's got these sort of cow-like ears, and she's quite often shown as a cow. Hathor was an important goddess in ancient Egypt. She's associated with motherhood, so quite a caring goddess, but she's also linked with festivals, dancing, music, and drunkenness. Here we have another amulet linked to solar divinities. In this case, it's Horus. Horus was the son of Osiris, who was the first god to be mummified, the first person to be mummified. And in Egyptian myth, Horus tried to avenge his father's death at the hands of his uncle Seth, and him and Seth had lots of battles. One of these battles, Seth managed to pluck out Horus's eye. It was later then healed by Hathor, so this eye symbol became a protective symbol, a symbol of healing. So during the mummification process, after they'd removed the internal organs, they would put the Wadjet eye on the incision where they took the organs out in order to magically heal the wound. And here you can see it's a left eye, and the left eye in Horus was the sun, and the right eye was the personification of the moon. So finally, just to talk about the balance, because the ancient Egyptians were very keen on balance. Everything had to be well organized and balanced out. So finally, we'll talk about not a solar divinity, but a lunar one. And this tiny amulet shows an ibis, which was related to the god Thoth. Thoth was a god of wisdom. He was thought to have invented hieroglyphs. He would be there after you died at the weighing of the heart, recording the verdict to see if you were worthy enough to get into the afterlife. So as well as being important as a god of wisdom and writing, he also was the personification of the moon. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour of solar divinities in the Your Museum, and I hope you enjoyed it. And just to say, hopefully when we reopen, you can all come and visit and see the objects on display.
Thank you so much to our colleague Jane. That was a wonderful tour through some of the solar divinities in ancient Egypt, and we love the dung beetles. We love the idea of the rolling of the dung representing the sun. From the smallest thing in the world comes, yeah, that sort of level of interest and relating back to the wider universe. So thank you ever so much, Jane. That was great. And I think also Ollie is somewhere else now in the museum. You can see the extent of everything that we've got here at the MERL. I'm just going to hand over to Ollie, wherever Ollie might be now.
Thank you, Anna. I'm back up in the mezzanine study space beside these extraordinary ceramic and pottery collections. Behind me, actually, you can see an object that connects in some ways to something that I've spoken to Neil about in the past. This is a Bellarmine jar. And Bellarmine jars were amongst the types of objects that were used as witch bottles, and witch bottles were used to protect the home, protect those sort of hearths and homes, those homely spaces with the warm glow of home against malign influences. And Neil has joined me both here at the MERL and at the Pitt Rivers Museum at the University of Oxford in events that focus on the idea of folk culture. And at both those events, he's come in the guise of his pseudonym, Abbey Robinson. And Abbey Robinson is the name under which Neil writes poetry. And he's shared with audiences in both those spaces work from this book, The Witch House of Canewdon, and other poems by Abbey Robinson, which has amazing illustrations by his partner, Wig Sale, who has also participated in a previous MERL Late. And we're going to be joined by Neil after his short film, which we're about to introduce. But just before we do, I just want to read a short extract from the eponymous poem from this, The Witch House of Canewdon, which is incredibly long. And it's all about a cunning man, the kind of people who would have made these kinds of Bellarmine jars into witch bottles, and into them they might have bunged things that included hair and pins and urine. And in this poem, Neil's exploring a cunning man who wants to keep his daughter young. His daughter is beautiful. He wants to keep her that way and not let her age. As for the wick, it was woven from the black hair of a doll grown long in the silence of the tomb it shared with its owner, the much-loved daughter of a mandarin. When Robin had finished, even he felt cowed by the magnitude of the object that he had made, its girth so vast his arms could not encircle it. That evening, after Pearl had retired to bed, and, on hearing her breath deepen into sleep, he came into her room, bent over her dreaming form, and kissed it once. Upstairs, the great candle awaited him. Locking the door of the little room fast behind him, he sat down on a stool and from his waistcoat took a silver file. This he applied to a large area of the unlit minster till he had taken from it a layer of wax, thin and transparent as the wings of a fly. When he woke Pearl the next morning, it was as if the hours of night had never been. No shadow dwelt about her eyes, her smile was unrestrained, each feature studied proved unchanged. So from that, I want to segue to Neil's amazing talk on Lighten Our Darkness. And this is Dr. Neil Cox, Associate Professor of Literary Perspective and Head of Outreach at the Department of English Literature here at the University of Reading. Over to Neil.
Lighten our darkness. We beseech thee, O Lord. Imagine actually if our beseeching worked for a minute and we got the light that we desired. What is it that would be lit? When the law lightens our darkness, what is it that the Lord is lighting? Well, obviously, it's our darkness. But that, in a way, is a really weird thought, because as I'm laying here talking to you, it's a slightly strange position by a fire, bathed in its light. There's a sense in which actually my environment is as dark as this cat. Lighten our darkness, we beseech thee, O Lord. What is it that is lit? It is our darkness. Our darkness is sustained. It doesn't go away. What I find myself in now is simply a lit darkness. You know, when I'm thinking about kind of light and darkness and coming to light, the process, that difficult process of bringing something to light, I often think about body worlds. I won't say it's a kind of an artwork, but remember, it's that kind of exhibition, Gunther van Hagen's exhibition of plasticized people. He got people to consent to, after their death, a process in which he plasticized their body. Thus he could take their skin off. And he displayed these plasticized corpses doing things like, I don't know, was it playing tennis or running and all sorts of strange activity. And like when people went to the exhibition, the general reaction was, oh my goodness, I can't believe it's me. I can't believe that's what I'm like underneath the flesh. It was like a truth. a hidden truth had come to light, had been brought to light, a hidden world. And gosh, what a world, because inside, it would seem, with these plasticized people, we are colourful and beautiful and brilliant and astonishing. What's problematic about this? Well, for most of the time, within our bodies, we are not colourful and beautiful and amazing, because our bodies are in darkness. Our bodies are not generally open to the light. There is no colour within us, for there is no light within us. And thus, even as Gun van Hagen's is showing absolute fidelity, in some sense, to our inner condition, these are indeed, in one sense, the colours of our heart. In another, the process of bringing this out and bringing this into the light has an absolutely transformative effect. It brings to us, our insides, what was never there. When something comes to light, it is always infidelity to what was in darkness. But the process cannot help but be altering, transformative, changing, disturbing, and untrue. It's not that we can see in this instance the darkness that was before, because that is precisely barred from us. It is what is hidden. We can see the darkness only when it comes to light. And that process is one of truth, and it is one of change. Paul de Man, the great literary critic, he said, to make the invisible visible is uncanny. There's something unhomely and divided and other than itself and impossible about our experience of light and our experience of darkness. They are bound to kind of narratives of truth-telling, but narratives that also cannot help but dissemble.
So thank you so much, Neil, for what's an incredible film, a really thought-provoking film. Neil, hopefully you're here with us now, and I'd love it if you could join us. I think you were going to share another poem with us, so I just briefly introduce you since you were sitting by that fire with a line of burns. Obviously, I'm creeping north of the border here, but fast by an ingle blazing finely, possibly with Riemann swats that crank divinely. That's a bit of Tam O'Shanter there. Neil should be with us by the fireside, ready to read us a poem and chat about his film.
Am I here?
You are here.
Oh, hi,
It's lovely to have you with us again.
Is it? And over there, tantalizingly out of sight, is a cat. Yeah, she's sitting on the top of the chair, just looking at me. In totally a cat way. She will not be she will not be directed. Yeah. That film is that's kind of the Neil Cox side of things, and I guess it's about just the idea of the catchphrase no repression without return. That's what it's about. The kind of that weird sense in which we think the things are waiting there in the darkness to come to light, but it's the coming to light that makes the things in darkness in a strange way, and that was kind of what I was riffing about. But yeah, Should I do a quick poem thing?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. How does that, just that riffing about things coming from the darkness and into light, how does that resonate with recent experience of being active in the humanities, just very briefly, and how you work and how you've had to adapt and work in these new and strange worlds in which we now live?
I mean, that's all there, but in a strange way, the symptom returns. I find myself in a strange way, kind of isolated and like misunderstood, and my voice barely being able to get out, and it's the same old. You know what I mean? It's always the way.
Yeah.
So things change, don't they? Things stay the same. Yeah.
So we're going to welcome back Abbey Robinson now and a little bit of poetry.
Abbey hasn't been around in a while, but I'll see what we can do. Yeah, so this is a really, really quick bit. As Abbey Robinson, I wrote a very long poem quite a few years ago about a cunning man, a kind of a wizard, for want of a better word, because why not write poems about wizards? And this guy, he created a really large candle to try and control people, but it started growing hair, and everything went wrong.
I introduced you with an extract from it, actually. So that's perfect. But yeah,
fantastic. Which bit did you? Sorry, I don't read it.
As for the wick, it was woven.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's go for this is just when he starts making the candle. It only lasts a minute. To this rich stew, now 1 part tenderness to 2 parts love. Things rare and terrible were cast. A great many of them obtained from distant latitudes, each one stained deep with horror's hideous proximity. The white fat from a spotless lamb, or gained in darkness and by degree. The loping tongue of a faithless hound, water from a saltless sea, upon which saltless tears were shed by one whose diet of pestilential meat did strike him 7 summers dumb until it passed finally a stream and blood. Such blood never you saw of ox, a crab, a pelican, and bumblebee, wave lap which stone was rubbed quite raw till ruby rich there gushed a spring, and last of all the sky itself were cut, until at arterial dawn it witnessed shepherds running open-armed unto their flocks. In it all went. There you go.
That's amazing. That's beautiful, Neil. And actually, that's a perfect way for us to segue from Abbey Robinson and from Neil and his work through to our next talk, because you referenced in that beautiful piece creatures from strange lands, the pelican, the seas, the salty tears, the complexity of that and the mixture of imagery in there is extraordinary. And I feel like there might be a little bit of colonialism mixed up in the narrative, as well as some
I think
Georgic
that's part of
going
that
on.
mix. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Is there a sort of rich connection there between this is an Essex cunning man, isn't it, and that sort of maritime tradition and reaching out to other parts of the world as well as sort of local traditions?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think also it was written, I was living in Essex, and that kind of that connection between these very like old stories and these old traditions and a sort of a different way of understanding the world that was kind of emerging at the time that I was there. I think that I was trying to link those two. Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us, Neil and Abbey. That's been absolutely wonderful, and great to hear you. Yeah, great to hear you reciting again, and we hope to have you back in the MERL soon and reciting more as Abbey Robinson. Yeah, and speaking more as Neil. So thank you again for an amazing film. We're going to move on now. Our next film is a piece called The Dark Side of Landscape, and it's from Dr. Paddy Bullard. And I mentioned the Caribbean there because this next piece connects to some rather complex and difficult and violent histories connected with enslaved people and the lives of enslaved people in the Caribbean, but also with Georgic tradition, which is a sort of tradition of pastoral pastoral writing that's represented here in the collections of the University of Reading. I just want to briefly share with you, because I have it with me, the book that Paddy is going to be speaking about, the Sugarcane Poem, in 4 books with notes by James Granger. And Paddy was not able to come and see it, unfortunately, due to lockdown, and film with it. So he's filmed his work from afar, but it's an incredibly beautiful book, and from the Overstone collection. And so he'll explain it far better than I will, but I just wanted to have it here so that we could show you just 1 or 2 extra leaves from it. And this obviously connects, as the title hints, to the production of sugar in contexts of enslavement in the Caribbean. Again, harking back to those conversations we had earlier about the National Trust report into colonialism and slavery and connections to big estates. And those connections, I think, what's really important about them for places like the MERL and contexts where social history happens and where we have these hands-on material connections with the lives of the social lives of people from the past, is that we need to think about not only about these texts, and Paddy talks about this incredibly powerfully, and about the people who wrote these texts, but also about the people whose lives they represent, both at this end of that colonial relationship, that history of enslavement, but also at the other end. So the social lives of people at the other end. And I just want to reiterate the connection with Ingrid Pollard, who's coming up as our artist in residence as part of Jeremy Birchar's project. Ingrid Pollard actually, I think, knows or used to work next door to Wear Wig, Neil's partner, the artist who did the artwork on his book. So there's a sort of an art connection there, but also Ingrid herself, her heritage lies in Guyana, and Guyana is a place where sugar was produced, Demerara sugar in particular, and this is the type of sugar that would have been used in Huntley and Palmer's biscuits, so a sort of Reading local connection there. And there are sort of powerful intersections there. So I'd urge you to go and look at Ingrid's relatively recent autograph work, and we'll share a link hopefully in the chat about that, which speaks very powerfully to the lives and the gestures and the behavior of people in those contexts, those Caribbean contexts where these dark histories emerge, but actually the everyday lives of those people, really powerful stuff. And one final note that again connects the work with Jeremy is that the book, The Sugarcane, that Paddy's about to talk to us about, connects to St. Kitts. And we actually have a co-supervised PhD of a student called Charlotte Field, working with the National Trust, with Julie Reynolds of the National Trust, looking at histories of Snowsell Manor. And Snowsell Manor was filled with objects by a man called Charles Paget Wade, and the wealth from that estate and that building came from plantations in St. Kitts. So lots of intersections with the MERL and work that we're involved in at the moment. So it's over to Paddy Bullard and the dark side of the landscape.
Hi everyone, my name is Paddy Bullard. I'm a lecturer here at the University of Reading, and I'm a great fan, a great supporter of the Museum of English Rural Life. So it's a huge pleasure for me to be part of the 2020 Being Human project at the MERL, the evening of lectures and presentations, subtitled Glow, We're All Interested in Light and Darkness today. I'm going to give a quick talk now about a very precious object in the Museum of English Rural Life collections. It's a book from 1764, and there are various interesting aspects of its history and background that make it very, very fitting for the darkness and light theme, and also for that great preoccupation of the MERL of landscape as well, because it is about landscapes, and it's set in a very particular landscape as well. Okay, here we go. So let's begin with the landscape, shall we? It's a landscape not often associated with darkness or unpleasantness. It's the landscape of St. Kitts. St. Kitts is one of the British Leeward Isles, or formerly British Leeward Isles in the Caribbean. And there's a historical landscape at play here as well, because I want to take you back from the 21st century to the 18th century, when St Kitts was a major location for the British-owned and British-run sugar plantation trade. Here is an image from 1780, a picture by an artist called Agostino Brunias of Creole and Afro-Caribbean celebrations on the Isle of St Kitts. And you can see there in the background a massive colonial fortress as well, underlining, as it were, the true sources of power and control on St Kitts in the 18th century. But let me tell you a little bit more about the book, which is really at the centre of the presentation that I'm giving this evening. The book is called The Sugarcane, a Poem, and here is my one photo of the Museum of English Rural Life copy of The Sugarcane. As you can see, it's a very beautiful book in many respects. What you can't quite see from this picture is the size of it. This is a quarto sized book. It's about almost a foot high, 27 centimetres high, about 20 centimetres long. So it's sort of coffee table size of book, basically. It's very beautifully typeset. The mise en page, the design of the page, the type of the page, is extremely elegant. And I really fell in love with the book when I first turned to the title page and I saw this incredibly minimalist but beautifully arranged design with the picture of the sugarcane on the left hand of the opening there, arching away to the left hand side. It's a very, very wonderful book. It's a prestige book as well. The size itself is an indication of how valuable, how expensive this work would have been. Because of course in the 18th century the most expensive component in any book was the paper that it was printed on. This book is extravagant in its use of paper. It has a page size which is much larger than it needs to be, and the result is one of space and extravagance in its presentation. Now, why is this book interesting? Well, its chief claim to fame historically is that it's part of a series of books that were published in the 18th century, known as the 18th century Georgics. They were imitations of a classical poem, or classical series of poems by Virgil, the Georgics, and the Georgics were a set of instructions about agricultural life, really, and about how to live as a farmer. In the 18th century, in the middle of the Age of Enlightenment, a series of imitations of the Georgics were published. They were briefly fashionable during the 1740s and 50s and 60s. Here we have Robert Dodsley's Public Virtue, a poem. It was only the first of these series that was ever actually published, Agriculture there. The Fleece, a Georgic about shepherding by John Dyer that was published in 1757. Third one along there is Granger's Sugarcane, the subject of the talk this evening, and then finally a later one, Richard Jago's Edge Hill, or The Rural Prospect, which is in fact an urban prospect because Edge Hill stretches out over the valleys of the Midlands and includes Birmingham and is a herald of the oncoming industrial Enlightenment. Now, these books are very interesting because they pose a great problem for the literary historian. They were briefly fashionable in the 1750s and 60s, but just as the Industrial and the Agrarian Revolution gathered pace, and just as Britain was becoming increasingly wealthy as a result of its technical and agricultural advances, the Georgics fell away and disappeared, and a few years later Wordsworth and the Romantics were writing a very different kind of rural poem, a poem which looked for wildness and beauty in landscapes rather than agriculture, work and wealth. So it's a question that many historians, literary historians, have asked in the past. Why did these books disappear? Why were they briefly fashionable? And in my own research, I think I've come up with a sort of at least partial explanation for why they disappeared. Something that historians haven't noted before is that they were actually all published by the same person, the publisher Robert Dodsley, who is in fact the author of one of the Georgics earlier on. And what I've been able to demonstrate in some recent research, for which the opportunity of examining the MERL copies of these poems was very important indeed. What I've been able to prove is that, first of all, these poems were not very commercially successful. They weren't distributed very widely. And secondly, they were very much a personal project on the part of the publisher, Robert Dodsley. And when Robert Dodsley retired and soon after died, there was no longer the impetus to publish these very expensive, very extravagant books. But that's another story. That's another story, and I want to focus on a different aspect of Granger's sugarcane today. The aspect that I want to focus on is the sugarcane's status as an Enlightenment book. This is, after all, a festival about lightness and darkness. And there's no doubt that Granger produced a very enlightened book when he published The Sugarcane. Indeed, Enlightenment images of light and darkness are there in the classical sources that Granger was drawing on as well. Here is a passage from John Dryden's translation of Virgil's Georgics about his uniquely scientific classical approach to explaining agriculture. Virgil writes that studious need might useful arts explore, from furrowed fields to reap the foodful store, and force the veins of clashing flints to expire the lurking seeds of their celestial fire. And those sparks coming from the flints are very much intellectual sparks. They are sparks of enlightenment in the classical source. Here is the original Latin there of the Georgic and a more modern translation there, so that experience from taking thought might little by little forge all skills, seeking in ploughed furrows the blade of corn, striking forth the spark hidden in the veins of flint. And Granger, in his poem, very much inherits these images of light, of enlightenment, of the sparks of inspiration and insight that the Georgic poem is designed to convey to the reader. Here is a very important passage from Book 1 of The Sugarcane. Planter, says James Granger, because this is a book addressed to the sugar planter, the sugar plantation owner. Planter, improvement is the child of time. What your sires knew not, ye their offspring know. But hath your art received perfection's stamp? Thou canst not say. Unprejudiced then, learn of ancient modes to doubt, and new to try. And if philosophy with wisdom deign thee to enlighten with their useful lore, fair fame and riches will reward thy toil. This is an extraordinary promise on Granger's part, isn't it? He's saying that farmers should be philosophers. Farmers should approach their science, the science of agronomy, with a special kind of wisdom, and they should seek out enlightenment. So who is this enlightened, who is this coruscating, bright figure who wrote this poem? James Granger. James Granger was born in Scotland in the early 1720s. We're not exactly sure when. I wish I could show you a portrait of him in this slide, but unfortunately there is no surviving portrait of James Granger. There is, however, a verbal portrait, a written portrait, in James Boswell's Life of Samuel Johnson, and it is reported from the lips of Samuel Johnson, who was a great friend of James Granger and a great admirer of him. He said of James Granger that he was a man who would do any good in his power. He loved Granger. And the pen portrait of Granger that we find in Boswell's Life of Johnson is a rather sad one, I think. Boswell reports that one day, this is in the late 1770s, one day Johnson told him the story a singular history of an ingenious acquaintance. And we know from Boswell's manuscripts that this was definitely Granger that he was talking about. And I'm going to read from my copy of Boswell's Life of Johnson here, the portrait for you. He, this is the ingenious acquaintance, had practiced physic or medicine in various situations with no great emolument. In other words, he hadn't been able to make very much money out of it. A West India gentleman, whom this man delighted by his conversation, gave him a bond for a handsome annuity during his life on the condition of his accompanying him to the West Indies and living with him there for 2 years. Again, this is absolutely accurate. In about 1759, a West Indian planter called Boraio paid Granger, or promised Granger, this annuity of £200 in precisely the circumstances that Johnson recounts. Granger accordingly embarked with this gentleman, but upon the voyage he fell in love with a young woman who happened to be one of the passengers, and married the girl. From the imprudence of his disposition he quarrelled with the gentleman and declared he would have no connection with him. So he forfeited the annuity, which is the whole purpose of him travelling to the West Indies in the first place. He settled as a physician in one of the Leeward Islands, and again this is true. Granger had qualified as a doctor in Edinburgh in the previous decade. And of course he settled in St Kitts, which is one of the Leeward Islands. A man was sent out to him merely to compound his medicines. This fellow set up as a rival to him in his practice of physic and got so much the better of him, that's Granger, in the opinion of the people of the island, that he carried away all the business, upon which Granger returned to England, and soon after he died. That last bit of the story is the only bit which isn't quite accurate, because we know that Granger came back to England in 1764 in order to oversee the publication of the sugar cane, and he actually returned to St Kitts fairly soon afterwards, and he died on the 26th of December 1766 in St Kitts of a Caribbean fever. So this is fascinating. This is a little pen portrait of Granger. Johnson seems to be suggesting that Granger is almost unique, is remarkable in the extent of his misfortune. It casts a rather, an almost tragic, but perhaps also slightly comedic in some ways, pall over this poor, unfortunate man's life. A hugely capable person, a hugely charming and sociable person, but a person who was dogged with misfortune. And I think this begins to suggest to us, perhaps, some of the dark sides of James Granger the man, and some of the dark sides of his poem, The Sugar Cane, as well. It is a poem which is tinged with disappointment and sadness, as all Georgics were. Virgil's Georgics is very much a poem which is about how difficult the life of the farmer, how difficult the life of the philosopher farmer in the dark landscape can be. Okay, so there we are, back to the sugar cane again, and let me just present to you very briefly some slightly more recent research. An American scholar called Anna Foy has recently published an article in the Review of English Studies, and she uncovered something that I didn't know about before the article came out, which is that the manuscript of the sugar cane survives. It's not listed in any of the official biographies of Granger. For instance, it's not listed in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, but it is there in the catalogues of Trinity College Dublin Library. Foy travelled to Dublin and read the manuscript, and it was very interesting to see in this article what she had found in it. What she found was very, very clear evidence that the sugar cane is in many respects an even more enlightened text than we thought it was before. Because in the manuscript there's evidence that Granger was engaging very, very closely, thinking very hard about the writings of that quintessential Scottish Enlightenment philosopher Adam Smith, and particularly about his book The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a great precursor to The Wealth of Nations, published in 1759. Now, one of the interesting things about the theory of moral sentiments is that it contains a very, very striking passage in condemnation of the slave trade and of British involvement in slave-run plantations in places like St Kitts during the 18th century. Smith writes, "There is not a Negro from the coast of Africa who does not, in this respect, possess a degree of magnanimity which the soul of his sordid master is scarce capable of conceiving. Fortune never exerted more cruelly her empire over mankind than when she subjected those nations of heroes to the refuse of the jails of Europe, to wretches who possess the virtues neither of the countries from which they came, nor of those which they go to, and whose levity, brutality, and baseness so justly expose them to the contempt of the vanquished." A very, very damning, very impassioned piece of writing there about the planter trade that, of course, Granger had set out to write a scientific and historical account of in the sugarcane. And reading Foy's article, reading about this extraordinary manuscript in Trinity College, Dublin, has made me reassess the sugarcane and that extraordinary book in the Museum of English Rural Life in various different ways. It's always been clear to readers of the sugarcane that there are extremely troubling and difficult aspects to the poem. And I should stress at this point that in the sugarcane there are also very hard-hitting condemnations of the morality of slavery. What Foy's research has revealed is that to a great extent Granger, while condemning slavery, is also engaging with what Adam Smith wrote in the theory of moral sentiments, this idea of the sordidness of what's known as the plantocracy of the people who were running islands like St Kitts. In other words, white British sugar plantation owners who were using slave labour in order to cultivate the sugar canes and grow very rich on the sugar canes in these islands. What Granger seems to be doing is he seems to be trying to present a balanced and nuanced account of the economy and the world of places like St Kitts, because what he seems to be arguing is against Adam Smith is that it was possible, and indeed there were important moral imperatives in action in the lives of the planters that Granger knew. Here's a passage from Book 3 of the Sugarcane, where Granger essentially says that there have been isolated examples of extreme cruelty towards the African slaves who did all the work on St Kitts, but they are relatively rare. So what he's discussing here is a case of slaves who have basically damaged themselves while operating the sugar refining machinery. And Granger says, "Are there, the muse can scarce believe this tale, are there who lost to every feeling sense, to reason, interest lost, their slaves desert and manumit them, generous boon," that's a sarcastic generous boon, "to starved, maimed by imprudence or the hand of heaven." In other words, Granger is saying here, can it be possible that there have been cases of slaves who have been maimed using the machinery on the plantations and who have basically been freed by their masters so that the masters don't have to feed them anymore? "The good man feeds his blind, his aged steed, that in his service spent his vigorous prime, and dares a mortal to his fellow man, for spite of vanity, thy slaves are men, deny protection. Muse, suppress the tale." What an interesting line that is. Muse, suppress the tale. If such cruelty has happened, and this is more than a huge if, I think, it must have happened. We know that it happened all the time in places like St Kitts. Granger is simply saying, suppress the tale. Look away to the other side. And look again at this footnote here. "Daily observation affords but too many proofs where domestic slavery does not obtain of the fatal consequence of indulged passion and revenge. But where one man is the absolute property of another, those passions may perhaps receive additional activity. Planters therefore cannot be too much on their guard against the first sallies of passion." In other words, what we're finding here is a book that is offering a philosophical argument about the moral structure of the planters' lives. It is saying that planters must be especially moral people in order to guard against the extraordinary dangers, the extraordinary opportunities for cruelty that their situation allows. It's a very interesting, it's a very enlightened argument in many respects. Here's another passage from book 4 of The Sugar Cane, where we see Granger acting explicitly in favour of anti-slavery and anti-slavery sentiments. He says to his muse, he hopes that his muse will quell tyrannic sway, knock off the chains of heart-debasing slavery, give to man of every colour and of every clime freedom, which stamps him image of his God. Then law's oppression's scourge, fair virtue's prop, offspring of wisdom, should impartial reign, to knit the whole in well-accorded strife. Servants, not slaves, of choice and not compelled, the blacks should cultivate the Caneland Isles. Once again, this is very much ahead of its time in certain respects. Remember, this is a good 10-15 years before the British abolitionist movement, the work of Thomas Clarkson, William Wilberforce, Aluda Equiano, and all that group really began to gain momentum. And it's interesting that Foy, after her research in the library, presents this text as a quintessentially enlightened text, that this is an Enlightenment style of argument, an Enlightenment style of thinking about the problem of slavery in a progressive sort of way. But I think looking again at the sugarcane over the last few years, one sees how our attitudes to these sorts of texts has changed, even since 2017, when Foy published her research. In the last few years, there's been an enormous movement, and the MERL is very much engaged in this movement, towards decolonizing the museum, decolonizing our imperial collections, and thinking in a more engaged and less excusatory way about the histories of the objects that we have in our collections. And I think, and this is my conclusion really to this talk, that the sugarcane is another text that really needs to be decolonized. We look at it and we tend to excuse it as an Enlightenment text, as a light which is as a text which is light, which is in the light rather than in the darkness of slavery. But of course, in those passages like the ones that I've just looked at, what we find is an anti-slavery rhetoric, a rhetoric which attempts to deal in an enlightened and progressive way with the phenomenon of the planters, but which is unable to address the structures, the economic structures, by which islands like St. Kitts inevitably worked in the 18th century. Granger cannot imagine a way in which the Afro-Caribbean slaves who actually do the labour in the island could inherit any kind of ownership. He cannot imagine St. Kitts without its white ruling class, without its white managerial class. Even after the abolition of slavery, those planters, that plantocracy, will always be there in Granger's imagination. And I think we need to think seriously about the sorts of messages and the weakness of texts like Granger's for helping us to think seriously about how a decolonized version of that history could be presented by us, both as historians and as collections professionals. Great. Thanks very much, everyone. And please do enjoy the rest of Glow on this fine evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Paddy, for an amazing talk. And as I said in the introduction, hopefully this and other work that's exploring these kinds of histories will set us on a path to explore some of those global connections that we have here at the MERL, part of sort of decolonial thinking and anti-colonial thinking that we're engaging with increasingly with lots of different aspects of our work. thinking of wider colonial connections in the world, in advance of the next talk, I'm thinking a little bit about wheat. Wheat went to Mexico along with the Spanish in the 1500s. And we have in the collections a piece of straw craft called a corazón de trigo, a heart of wheat, which is a corn dolly made by an English straw craft person as an example of the kinds of crafts made in Mexico. We don't have many connections with Mexico, but we do, as you can see from behind me, have lots and lots of straw craft in the collections. And we're working with some of this, some of which is straw craft that was on display at the Festival of Britain, which I've mentioned a couple of times this evening. We're working with some of that as part of a project with Egham Museum called Egham Visions, where they'll be hopefully borrowing some of that, and you can check out some of their work as well. The next talk is Convivencia, Lightness and Darkness in Mexico's Day of the Dead. And for those of you who don't know what the Day of the Dead is, Dr. Alana Kant is about to explain that. The Day of the Dead takes place the day after a festival that we've recently experienced here in the UK, Halloween, and it's worth just noting that there's been some brilliant humanities-based work coming out about Halloween in terms of public engagement from the University of Reading recently. Just a quick nod to Anne Lawrence Mather's brilliant blog post about Reading-based Halloween and medieval history, and Helen Parish's amazing lecture on bats, cats and pointed hats. So you can hopefully find those bits online and check those out. But now we're going to hear about Lightness and Darkness in Mexico's Day of the Dead from Dr. Alana Kant, a lecturer in social anthropology in the Department of Archaeology here at the University of Reading.
Hello, I'm Dr. Alana Kant, and I'm a lecturer in social anthropology in the Department of Archaeology here at the University of Reading. My research is about material culture, art, and religion in Oaxaca in southern Mexico. In this photographic talk, I want to take you to Mexico in the autumn when the annual celebration of Dia de Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, is celebrated. I want to give you a sense of why the celebration is so important to the people who live there, and the ways that darkness and lightness and other sensory qualities help to build the experience of Day of the Dead. Before we begin, I'd like you to take a moment to go find an object that reminds you of a family member. It could be a photograph, an heirloom, their favorite sweet, or even just an item that you think they would like. Look at it and hold it in your hands, or if you don't have it to hand, just hold it in your mind. Then come back and we'll begin. You probably have heard of Dia de Muertos, or Day of the Dead, before. In recent years, it has become iconic across the globe as it gains in popularity in the United States as Mexicans and Mexican Americans become more visible in American politics and popular culture. Day of the Dead has featured in films like James Bond's Spectre, and perhaps more famously, Disney Pixar's film Coco. Where Bond's Day of the Dead is all costume and spectacle, the story told in Coco gets closer to the way that everyday people celebrate this important festival in the area of Mexico where I work. In Coco, the plot twists around dynamics of family and remembrance, and it places the family altar at the center of the drama. The family altar is indeed at the heart of these celebrations. But in this talk, I will suggest to you that the act of remembering is not all that it is important in Day of the Dead. In Oaxaca, the dead are not just remembered in the form of a passive recollection. They are also summoned and engaged with through acts of care, what my friends in Oaxaca call convivencia, or the act of living together. For a few days each year, people in Oaxaca live together with their loved ones who have passed. They do this through activities that emphasize the senses. The eyes see lightness and darkness in color and candlelight. The nose smells incense, flowers, and baking bread. The tongue tastes chocolate, chili, and strong mezcal, the local spirit made from agave. Hands and fingers feel the frames of treasured photographs and the small heirlooms that connect the living to the dead, much as I have asked you to connect with your loved ones today. What is today called Day of the Dead, or Dia de Muertos, actually spreads over 2 or 3 days from late October into November. These dates coincide with the traditional Catholic feasts of All Saints and All Souls, and attending Mass remains an important part of the celebrations for many people. At times, people connect the celebration of Day of the Dead to pre-Hispanic indigenous belief systems, which did emphasize death and the underworld as important features of their cosmologies. However, more recent research by Mexican historians suggests that the contemporary festival derives almost exclusively from European Catholic origins. The Feast of All Souls, as a commemoration of the dead in November, was already established in Western Christian Church by the 13th century. Whatever its origins, the contemporary celebration of Day of the Dead in Mexico is only partially tied to the official Catholic feasts. Beyond the church, the collective activities that are central to Day of the Dead, like processions and dances, vary from community to community. But in this talk, I focus on the intimate family altars that people make in their homes. As I mentioned, I do my research in the state of Oaxaca, which, as you can see on this map, is located on the southern Pacific coast of Mexico. My current research is focused in the village of Santa Cruz Mixtepec. Santa Cruz for the Holy Cross that is the patron of the village, and Mixtepec, a Nahuatl or Aztec name that means amongst the clouds. So in English, the village's name is the Holy Cross in the clouds, referencing the way that the thick clouds can nestle in the steep valleys there. Santa Cruz Mixtepec is a relatively small municipality with only a few thousand inhabitants. It has a church, which is very well attended, and a ruined monastery from the 16th century. There is also a small weekly market that provides the basics, so people don't always have to go down into the larger towns in the valley to get what they need. Although the villagers have a number of different occupations, from bakers, teachers, and doctors, to DJs and computer technicians, many families still cultivate the land, and the autumn is the season of the harvest. The sunshine is warm and it dries the maize. The rich purples and reds of this traditional corn are repeated over and over in the deep, dark purple tones that adorn the family altars that you will see in a moment. At harvest, people are also busy cutting the cempasúchil, the flowers of the dead. These are grown in neighboring villages down in the valley, where they turn the fields a dazzling orange, often accentuated by smaller beds of magenta and white chrysanthemums, which are also used. The intense bright color of the cempasúchil seems to radiate with the sun's light, which at this time of year in Mexico has an intensity and clarity that casts the landscape in a golden tone that seems appropriately nostalgic. These flowers are a fundamental component of the special altars that people build in their homes. Photographs of family members who have passed, images of Christ and important saints, and other meaningful items are brought out from the year-round family altar and positioned in pride of place where they can be seen by all. The flowers may be arranged in vases, but more often they are used to build arcos, trellises of color and scent that crown the altar and mark it off as a special celebratory space. At noon on October 31st, the altar is finished, and incense made from copal tree resin is lit. Its sharp, piney scent contrasts with the sweetness of the flowers. The smoke is used to bless the altar, and the dead are named and remembered. The smoke fills the air of the altar, purifying and mystifying as it adds shadow to the bright sunshine. The scent of baking bread is also ubiquitous in the week leading up to Day of the Dead. Pan de Muerto, or bread of the dead, is soft and sweet, ideally eaten with a steaming cup of hot chocolate. It takes the form of round, fat bodies with little painted sugar faces that are pressed into the soft dough. In eating Pan de Muerto, people symbolically take death into their bodies, consuming it and conquering it through the enjoyment of the taste and texture of the soft bread. The bread is also placed on the altar. In this image, you can see all of the components that make the altar complete. Most important are the photographs of family members who've died and the images of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, the Last Supper, and hidden from view in this picture are also St. Martin and St. Jude. Around the photographs we find piles of fruit and nuts, fresh honey from the family's own hives, cooked dishes that are remembered as the favorites of the deceased, and the all-important alcohol, mezcal and beer. These foods and drinks are important because it is said that the spirits of the dead return at this time to convivir, to live together with their families, and they need refreshment and good welcome after their long time away. You can also see fizzy drinks, chocolates, and sweets on this altar. These are left for the angelitos, the little angels or spirits of deceased children who come visiting on October 31st or during the main feast of All Souls on November 2nd. These little spirits come to their families' homes, but they might also go visiting to their friends' altars too. People leave trails of cempasúchil petals to lead the angelitos from the road to the altars to find their treats. Candlelight is central to any Day of the Dead altar, and many families will keep candles on the altar burning for 9 days and nights to complete a novena for the dead. In Roman Catholicism, the novena is a traditional period of devotional prayer that lasts for 9 days or even 9 weeks, and it may be undertaken especially at the death of a loved one. Candlelight is important throughout public and private celebrations of Day of the Dead, both as a symbol of the resilience of human spirits in death and also as a literal guiding light for the spirits on their paths home. The contrast of light and dark, of candlelight, shadow, incense, and color is everywhere during Day of the Dead. This personal connection to deceased loved ones through these practices that emphasize the sensory qualities of taste, sight, and smell, and especially the contrast of lightness and darkness, are also at the heart of more public celebrations of Day of the Dead throughout Mexico. After building their altars, families go to the cemetery in order to decorate the graves with candles and again with cempasúchil flowers. It is, of course, the cemetery that is the main focus of the public celebration of Day of the Dead on November 2nd. Hundreds of candles prick the darkness and illuminate the flowers and the revelers. Many people, including whole families, spend the entire night of November 2nd, eating, drinking, singing, and playing music in the graveyard, lasting until dawn. November 3rd is notably quiet in Santa Cruz Mixtepec, as everyone, the living and the dead, sleep off the night celebrations. But the family altars, which I think are the most meaningful and significant customs of this celebration, last another few days yet, and through them people remember and live with their loved ones who've passed. And now, before we go, I'll ask you to think about your family member and the object that I've asked you to consider, and think about how even in our own culture, our experiences of love and family become entwined with the ways that things feel, look, and taste. Thank you for listening.
And while you were listening to that amazing talk by Dr. Lana Kant, I was able to go and find the corazón de trigo, the heart of wheat, which makes me think of what I might put on my ofrenda my family altar, and I might think about a heart of wheat connecting to my farming father and my farming past. So here's a photo of me sitting on my father's lap. Thankfully, my father's still with us, and so are my siblings. There's another one there as well, but they're not in there. They'll be very jealous. But what would you put on your ofrenda, Anna?
I actually bought, because I saw Alana's talk before this evening, and you're right, it was absolutely amazing. It's such a wonderful piece of work and research that she's doing. And I brought my grandpa's whiskey glass with me. He passed away about 5 years ago, and gave it to my partner before he died. And so I've brought it with me here to raise a toast to him this evening. So yeah, thank you, Ollie, and yeah, thank you so much, Alana. That was truly wonderful.
I think if my dad's watching this evening, he's probably raising a glass at home of exactly that beverage. So.
Cheers, Mr. Douglas, Senior. So we have now got the last film of the evening. It's a truly wonderful piece of work from Carla the Arts, and actually fittingly, Shushmita, who's the artistic director of Carla the Arts that we met earlier this evening, she's lost her father recently, and she has continued working and rallying everyone around her. She's been an absolute gem to work with, and she's made this and references him in it, her father, and the tribute she's made, and it's a really brave and beautiful tribute that she's made to her father. So I'd like to share with you Carla the Arts in the Reading Abbey ruins, and also we've got the survey, the feedback survey from Being Human, that's in the chat bar for you as well. So if you could look at that before we wrap up for the evening, that would be great as well. So anyway, sit back and enjoy the beautiful Abbey ruins and the beautiful Carla the Arts with their Diwali performance. Thank you.
We are here today to celebrate Diwali. Diwali is Festival of Lights. This means row of lights. This was the day historically when Rama sort of came back with his brother and his wife to Ayodhya. So all the people in the palace were extremely happy to see their prince back. It's good over evil. So that is the whole philosophy of Diwali. But also every festival is connected with food. So there is something called Annakut. So as part of Diwali, what happens is there's heaps of food piled up. So a lot of people sit together, eat together. You know, a lot of food is also offered to needy people as well as part of the celebration. So this is a time also for people to reflect and support people who are not as privileged as they are. This is a wonderful way of bringing people together. This is something very personal to me. My father, who is a dancer, he's been coming to this country since 1974. So he is a pioneer of a style of dance called Kathak, which one of our dancers is going to present. So he passed away very suddenly last Wednesday. So I'm just going to pay a tribute to him because he's always come and helped us, volunteered, and he worked with schools. A lot of people know him. It's my way of showing sort of respect for his work and celebrate it. And he's there somewhere in the spirit, I'm sure. And then we move on to the Diwali story. So we have my colleague who is going to do the palace scene. Then we have one of our dancers. He is going to be acting the scene of fighting Ram and the battle scene, you know, and I think you can see the battle come alive here. And then we have the Diwali story, you know, with sort of candles, and we're talking about the story of Ram and Sita through the story. Then we have, from the Diwali story, we move on to something else. So another part of India celebrates a goddess Kali. And there is actually an exhibition of Kali at the British Museum for 4 months. So she has been sometimes used, I was told, to scare the British when they were there because she was a fierce goddess, lived in the crematorium. So we have Kali, our dancer, presenting Kali. His name is Kali. He's going to do Kali.
The instrument I'm going to play is called tabla. It's a percussion from the northern part of India, and it's the main percussion in the Hindustani classical music. Like in our country, we have two classical music traditions. One is the north, which is the Hindustani, and the South Indian classical music tradition is called the Carnatic music. So it's like they are totally opposite, and the way they treat a musical scale or maybe a rhythmic cycle is very different. So I'm playing tabla, which is a 400-year-old tradition. It's the only percussion in the world which has an aspect of melody. So like you can manipulate different sounds on it, and it is tuned to a particular pitch when you're accompanying other musicians. Like today I'm going to be playing with Avtar, so it all depends on the pitch of his instrument. So if I'm playing with a vocalist, I might need a tabla of a different pitch, and so yeah, that's the beauty of the drums.
And then we have got Avatar, who's a new sort of artist today. He's working with us.
The instrument I'm playing tonight is called the taus. It's an ancient stringed instrument. It's derivative of the sarangi instrument, which is known as one of the oldest stringed instruments in the world. That is an instrument that has no frets, so you just play on the strings. This instrument you have frets on. The taus, the name in Persian means peacock. It's the shape of a peacock. It has a very soothing tone. Typically it's used to accompany Sikh hymns. It is quite a rare instrument. Yeah. It's great to have a platform like this to showcase these instruments. I think there's a range of things that are going to be performed. So we're going to have maybe a solo classical piece, and although I say solo, it's really a duet. We're playing for the first time together. There'll be items that my friend's going to be playing, and I'll be accompanying, and there'll be items that I'll be playing and he'll be accompanying. Same time we're going to have dance, and I think there's a variety of dance. There's a number of dances, and what we're going to be doing, we'll be holding the rhythmic cycles for them. So with the addition of the dancers, they're going to be showcasing their flavor, but we're really there to support them in the rhythmic cycles and creating and enhancing that atmosphere that they're exploring.
The best bit is, I think, working with the sort of museum, and they've been fantastic. They've been very supportive. Working with my team of artists who are absolutely flexible and wonderful. And I think the whole sort of process, thank you so much for making it happen for us. We're just loving it.
Welcome back from an extraordinary piece of performance at Reading Abbey. Reading Abbey, of course, if any of you had time to look at Anne Lawrence Mather's blog, was at one point the resting place of the hand of St. James, and St. James gave rise, under the name Santiago, to the pilgrim trail to Santiago de Compostela. The symbol of that was the scallop shell, and that's the same symbol that we see echoed in the Shellmex petrol globe behind me that would have adorned the top of the petrol pumps sometime in the mid-20th century, or the early to mid-20th century. These kind of objects were railed against by the Council for the Preservation of Rural England, who thought they were a blight on the countryside. And in some senses, they give rise to some of those conversations that we might have today about light pollution, about eyesores in the countryside, and other problems related to climate breakdown. Lots of complex conversations about the impact of light and other forms of technology in rural spaces and places. Interestingly, though, the scallop shell is also, and rather neatly and fittingly, one of the symbols of the University of Reading, and adorns the top of our crest, our university crest, and so sort of on that rather neat summing note that draws together Reading Abbey, the petrol globe behind me, complex issues and challenges that the humanities might help address, and of course our host institution, the University of Reading, which is what the Museum of English Rural Life is part of. I think it's time for us to say thank you all for joining and good night. Can I pass over to you, Anna?
Please do. Thank you, Ollie. Thank you for making all of those wonderful connections for us all evening and taking us all the way through light and darkness and some elements of the MERL's collection. So yeah, thank you ever so much, Ollie. And just a massive thank you to everybody who's made this evening possible. It has been brilliant to be able to come to you live and online. Thank you so much to Shushmita, to Barjan, to Priya, and everyone at Carla the Arts. Thank you so much to all of our University of Reading speakers and colleagues, Shalini, Jeremy, Jane, Neil, Paddy, and Alana. Thank you so much. Thank you too, of course, to Michael and everyone at the Being Human Festival. It wouldn't have been possible without you. We're really proud to be part of the Being Human Festival again this year. And again, a reminder, please fill in the survey to allow Being Human and us to carry on doing this work. Again, just a huge thank you, Ollie. It's been brilliant not being with you this evening. And
thank you too, Anna. It's been absolutely amazing.
Thank you, of course, to all of our colleagues and co-creators here at the MERL. Particularly special thanks to Alison and Angela and Claire P, who have been wonderful behind the scenes, and also to Ria and Sheila and our partners at Reading Museum. But also just the most heartfelt thank you to the most astonishing support from our colleagues Jo and Susanna, who've been working behind the scenes. Jo particularly has been amazing in getting all of the technical support together for us, helping the academics film their talks, topping and tailing everything, keeping Ollie and I on track, which is no easy task. So I don't know if Jo and Susanna in there can just give everyone a wave goodbye.
Susanna, come on, come through.
Little curtain call there. Massive thank you, folks. It's really
they've been amazing.
Done it without you, or wanted to have done it without you, so thank you.
And
of course, not least of all, thank you for watching and sticking with us till 10 o'clock to the very end of Glow. We hope you are glowing. We are glowing here, and we hope very much to see you at the MERL soon. Good night.
Can we do a bow?
Good night. Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.